Hi, everybody. Welcome in. Welcome in. Let the session begin. Hi. Hi. We go high, right? Up high. We're not going hell low. We're not going hell as low. We're not going to meet at that area. We're going to go high as high, babies. Definitely love the connection. Love those who have been here. Anybody new coming in, come on in. Come on in. This is a place we want to awaken. We want unity consciousness. We want to bring a oneness. We want to be a vibratory frequency of love, light, and energetic field, which we have the other side we have to overcome. Because darkness don't mean necessarily evil. Evil is another part of something else that can be dark, but darkness actually is ignorance or not knowing, which isn't necessarily evil. But you can be taken advantage in these states. But we're not going to make this long, my opening speech, because this is going to be a little bit longer video because I got a video to play. But we're going to talk about something that we've seen and we know about, especially been around. We're going to talk about the bright morning star, the light bringer. Is that Jesus, the bright morning star? Is it? Doesn't it say that he's the bright morning star in Revelations? That he's the bright morning star, but also, doesn't it say that Lucifer is the bright morning star? Wow. They told us Lucifer is evil, but bright morning star Jesus, bright morning star Lucifer? How's this working? What is the bright morning star? Let's find out. Got a couple things to share. Let's do it. We're not going to hesitate because this is a little longer. The video is going to be a little longer, so I just want to go here. We're going to talk about this a little bit. So, yes, please go all the way. So right here, immediately we're going to talk about this. In the name Lucifer's meaning, in Old English, Lucifer means the morning star or the planet Venus, which I went over. When it appears in the sky before sunrise, which does, it's the first light, it lights up before the sun lights it up. It is derived from the Latin word Lucifer, which is made up of lux, lucius, and fer, to bring. So it's light to bring, which word you get the light bringer. In the King James Version of the Bible, Lucifer appears in Isaiah, as I said, the word that means morning star or the planet Venus. It's also translation in the world Hillel, which means shining one in Hebrew. Bearer of the light. Lucifer also means bearer of the light. Light bringing refers to the former splendor of the angel Lucifer, who was once considered the greatest of the angels, which is the light Venus, right? And also in Christianity, Lucifer is a name given to the angel, fell from grace and became Satan. In one interpretation, Lucifer is the name of the fallen archangel named Samuel? Ha ha ha. Who was banished from heaven after rebelling against his father. He was sent to hell as a ruler, in his name, Lucifer. Actually, there's another scripture now they're not bringing out. I wish they did. Old English, again, it says the morning star fallen angel derived from the light bearer. So there's some light there with Lucifer. And if I went a little farther, which I don't see here, it's even putting together, they're making it Satan, but there's a scripture, I believe in Revelations, I can't say exactly where it is anymore. As I've read other books, like I said, I preached esoteric Christianity for about 18 to 20 years when I woke up out of the regular. I was a Pentecostal church, but we're not going to go deep on me. I have that story in the past videos you can look up, but I did because we got along but notice this. So this is what I've said many times. It actually comes from, in the ancients, Lucifer was the planet Venus, which before the sun rises, you look out, you'll see directly underneath, you're going to see the sun when it's before it starts coming out, that the very light that you see, the morning star, breathing the morning, welcoming him, it ends, the light bearer Lucifer, which is the planet Venus. That's what it is. So we're going to get it. We're going to find out about the light bringer today in a very, I'm always going to shout out to my girl. I love Sarah's teachings, and what connected me to Sarah was me being led to her. And actually within a month after that, she was by my area and I went to her event and it was great, met some great people there. And actually me and James went and hung out there. So yeah, so we're going to get into this. It's a lengthy video, a little bit, so we're going to get right to it. I'm not going to waste much time. I will stop to add, but let her go.
Luciferian energy is one of the most prevalent forces within the world at large, and especially within the spiritual community. And yet it is still one of the most misunderstood forces within nature. So today I'm going to be explaining from the esoteric sphere exactly what Luciferian energy is. Luciferian energy comes from the personified force in nature that we know as Lucifer. Now, Lucifer is an impulse within the cosmos and within nature. And this impulse has certain attributes and characteristics that set this force in nature apart from another force in nature and yet another force in nature. So it's distinct attributes and characteristics that this force in nature encompasses and embodies. And when it's expressed through that thought form, through those patterns, and through those elementals, then that is what composes a force in nature. And so Luciferian energy is known for having a lot of exalted attributes and positive ones, and also a lot of what we would consider detrimental, negative, and even juvenile impulses and attributes within this force in nature. So it's really important to be able to look at this from the esoteric sphere of reality, because in the esoteric sphere, now we're able to look at things from a mature perspective and a more neutral or objective perception, rather than looking at something from the exoteric sphere, where we're more likely to confuse the true meaning of this force in nature and then assign it the same attributes as other forces in nature that are similar, but ultimately are not at all the same force in nature. So Luciferian energy, when we're looking at it from the esoteric sphere, is composed of primarily two elements, and those elements are fire and air. In my video, Spiritual Alchemy, the esoteric art of ascension, I talk about how all of the cosmos is created by different ratios of the elements, as well as body, spirit, and soul. Luciferian energy only contains within it fire and air, an overemphasis of spirit with very little soul and no body. This impulse, this stream of consciousness that is a personified force in nature, seeks to expand human consciousness.
Notice that when you take those two elements, fire and air, if the air blows too much, the fire spreads too very fast and can get out of control. Just think about that when we're dealing with alchemy.
And so for that reason, it is very positive and beneficial for a being to have Luciferian energy harnessed when they need to expand their consciousness. That's why Luciferian energy is also equated with enlightenment. Because if we had to give Luciferian energy any credit for anything, it would be enlightenment. It's a very enlightening and insightful energy when we're harnessing it in that spiritual purpose. So Luciferian energy has a certain degree of enlightenment with it, but we can still look at it as like a juvenile form at the end of the day of this enlightenment, because it's one that's not embodied. And it's one that is missing key information due to the fact that its perception is coming strictly from the elements of fire and air. So it's not an embodied state at all. In fact, Luciferian energy seeks to disembody the human consciousness. It actually thinks there's a problem with the material realm. It has an issue with physicality. It constantly thinks that humans and human consciousness needs to be saved from the physical experience. And that's where we have seen all of our spiritual teachings up into this age come from. One form or another has been heavily influenced in the spiritual community, in religion, in all forms of belief systems. Luciferian belief systems have been the stronghold. They have been the dominant energy of any form of spiritual beliefs here. And even the funny thing is that when people think they're coming from Christ consciousness, So much of the time, they're actually coming from Luciferian energy. This is when a being is overly subjective, like super subjective, lifted out of their body into such a high state of spiritual realization, of such a high state of expanded, insightful consciousness, that they start having no discernment whatsoever. And they start to believe that this ecstatic peak state of consciousness that they're in, this heightened ecstasy, is the true form of reality. And anything else they begin to deny. So they deny humanity from divinity. And then they put a very one-dimensional form onto divinity. And so this is what's coming from the elements of consciousness that are perceiving the human experience as being wrong, as being soiled, literally. And because it's coming from an exalted viewpoint, but one that is lacking all of the different degrees, all of the different multidimensional elements in order for it to fully be integrated into something that we would consider now in this age as Christ consciousness. So it's a consciousness that is pre-discernment. Discernment can be linked with what we know as Christ consciousness. It's more integrated. And so without discernment, what we're left with is an undiscerning form, which is therefore juvenile in nature, because to not have discernment is to be immature.
Immaturity, to not have discernment. Remember I said on former videos, discernment is needed in every level. So if you don't have it, you can't be mature, because how can you raise and measure something with your discernment that you don't have discernment? You wouldn't even know what was what.
In fact, a lot of these concepts about Luciferian or Armonic or even satanic energies can be looked at by someone as being like, oh, this is just religion remixed. This is just, like a religious tone placed onto spirituality. But really, the most mature way of distinguishing religion from spirituality is looking at religious concepts as being a very diluted, very contorted, and distorted form of what the true spiritual essence that's contained within these concepts are. So spirituality is more of the mature, developed observation and knowing of these forces in nature. So these different personified forces in nature are going to be influencing and impacting human consciousness, regardless of whether we know about them and regardless of whether we view them as only being from religious belief systems. It's more so that these religious belief systems didn't understand them in a mature fashion. They didn't understand how these forces truly act upon our human consciousness and what that relationship with these forces in nature are. So the strongest way that Luciferian forces influence human consciousness is by getting it to escape the human experience. Luciferian energy likes to break things out of their structure, which is a very positive force to harness if one is looking to break out of certain belief systems that no longer serve them, is looking to expand their consciousness. But what this energy seeks to do is fully break a being out of the physical experience, out of their human consciousness, to the point where it's actually detrimental. This is where escapism, this is where addiction, this is where denial come into play. Luciferian energy is the strongest force behind addiction. It's the strongest force behind any type of spiritual escapism from the physical reality or any type of escapism in general.
Powerful.
And it's definitely behind any type of energy that seeks to deny humanity, to deny emotions, to deny anything that is a part of the human and mainly a part of the physical experience. So it's one that is the prominent feature within the false light. If you'd like to know more about what the false light is, you can watch my video on the false light deception, because in that video, I basically talk all about Luciferian energy without saying that term yet and without introducing it, as well as its opposing force in nature, or its counterbalancing force in nature, which is harmonic energy. which is the personified force in nature that we know as calcification or inertia. So Luciferian energy is a part of that false light dichotomy because it is opposed to body, it is opposed to physicality and to matter. And it's trying to save human consciousness by helping it escape the physical realm. Anytime a being is overly, enthusiastically in a frenzy-like state for their belief systems of a religious nature, that is Luciferian energy. And anytime a being is in such an expanded, ungrounded state of consciousness that they're in a state of oneness, but a juvenile phase, a juvenile state of oneness, that is Luciferian energy. And that is so prevalent, especially in the spiritual community, among people who mean well, but they are coming from a very undiscerning viewpoint. And what I mean by an undiscerning viewpoint is when we think we're in an exalted state of consciousness for not being able to have discernment, or to not be able to discriminate between higher and lower, or discriminate between different concepts. Luciferian energy mainly expresses itself in the spiritual community as the phrase, everything is everything. You see how there's no discernment inside that phrase? That phrase can also mean something very beautiful and has an exalted and accurate truth to it. But when we're using it in the Luciferian perception, and we're having the Luciferian influences upon our consciousness, when we go everything is everything, we're actually coming from a very juvenile and immature perception. It's one that wants to actually shut down discernment, shut down maturity and spiritual growth. So we're abusing this.
That's heavy because that's why I really been pushing the growth, but having discernment. Because if you don't have discernment, it can definitely, I could see it being energy to help you in certain ways, but if it's not harnessed, it will run away with you and take your ego to a place where you think you're exalted, but you're really denying yourself. That's heavy.
Higher truth of everything is everything by coming from a rebellious energy. Rebellious specifically against there being a process, a rebellious energy around there being a structure in place, or having to even learn a system, or even through the dynamic of there being teacher-student. Because somebody who's truly in an everything is everything state wouldn't even have an issue with there being a teacher and learning sometimes. That would be actually a more aligned, integrated, and egoistless state if we're going to talk about the ego in any form of negative or positive ways. In a positive way of being egoless, it would be having no issue with there being a teacher sometimes and with there being a process of learning. This mentality of everything is everything, or my opinion is equal to your opinion and matters just as much as your opinion, even though I am not informed and I am ignorant, comes from the shadow side of oneness. It comes from the side of oneness that does not recognize differentiation is included within the all. So within discernment, which is the holy, sanctified state of oneness, you're able to hold the truth that we are all one, and also hold the truth that there are various different grades of truth. There are various different grades of awareness. So division and unity coexist within oneness, which is why a lot of people are innocently confused in the spiritual community around what unity timelines are and divided timelines, thinking that they're coming from a truly integrated state of consciousness when they say all beings are going to ascend. There's only one, when in reality, they can't perceive beyond that luciferic thought form to see inherently that in unity consciousness and in discernment, there are going to be differentiation. There are going to be, through the act of having free will, different choices play out for different individuals, which call forward different timelines, even if that means timelines split. So it's common to think that there's only one ascension trajectory for all, not knowing that that's just Luciferian energy that hates free will. In fact, the second most prominent feature within the spiritual community and within the world at large, which is an impulse and a stream of consciousness coming from Luciferian energy is the fact that free will is wrong, or that free will doesn't even exist, because it denies other aspects and attributes within creation. It cannot see free will, and yet the dissonance and the paradox of the Luciferian energy is that it is constantly trying to save humans from their own free will. So it has major issue with there being free will, and yet the dissonance, the fragmentation going on in this energy is that it denies free will and yet is severely always trying to save humans from their own free will so that they go back into an earlier stage of development and do not continue to mature.
So it would be to keep you immature by not making, I mean, it's an aspect of not making you whole. It's an aspect of truth, right? Because this is the differentiation is aspects. I might be a healer, you might be something else. I might like chocolate ice cream, you like vanilla. And that's even what our purposes are, if you can use that. We differate even though we're on a unity path. That makes sense because that's definitely there, where they're almost wanting to take everybody into, like she said from the beginning, air and fire, but immaturity.
It sees something inherently wrong with the process of development and the process of evolution. And so it wants to save us, like we're children, from having free will, and it wants to diminish all of our senses so that we thoroughly disintegrate only into the senses of observing and hearing, so that we're just eyes and ears. And that state of passivity is what the Luciferian energy views as exalted, and it truly views as enlightened and what is correct for humanity. So it's trying to save us from making free will decisions. It is strongly opposed to free will and truly believes that we need to be in the peaceful state of observation and hearing only. No other senses, no other course of evolution throughout any more of our bodies, like the physical body, the mental body, the emotional body,
yeah.
and the etheric body, and our astral body. It wants us to go back to an earlier time of our evolutionary course so that it's in an immature and juvenile form of what consciousness is. And that's where we see all of the spiritual systems from the past have threads and very strong connections with. Any time that our humanity was pitted against our divinity, or that there was a heightened state of encouragement towards the spiritual at the expense of our human nature or at the emotional body or any of those. And believe it or not, even though our human consciousness is transitioning into another phase of consciousness right now, meaning that Luciferian energy is not going to be the dominant influence upon humanity, even though it was in the past. There's still a heavy influence of Luciferian energy within the spiritual community. Anytime humans need to look at the world in an overly subjective way that has severe cognitive dissonance in how it views spiritual teachers, spiritual concepts, spiritual beliefs, so that it needs to be fragmented from any form of humanity. And when we view that as needing to go back to a very infantile form of development, that is what the New Age community and the spiritual community and the consciousness community at large, all these different parts of the spiritual community, are waking up out of and are integrating. They're learning now that this Luciferian energy, even if they're not calling it Luciferian, is not all there is to the story. And that even though it's super helpful to have the understanding from these forces in nature and have what their gifts and knowledge bring to the table, that there's more to this story and there's more to becoming multidimensional and even embodying our higher self. So anytime we're stuck in super fundamentalist religious concepts or super fundamentalist concepts in general that have to do with spirituality or the way that we view the world in a very juvenile and one-dimensional form of existence. It is coming from this personified force in nature. Or, if that's too pagan for you, it is coming from this thought form within consciousness. And this thought form is one that has enormous amounts of cognitive dissonance in it. So we see in the world at large, the biggest issue is cognitive dissonance. And this
Soul loss.
dissonance, it meaning compartmentalization.
Wow.
So
Colleges.
this compartmentalization
Schooling system.
that creates so many forms of fragmentation all comes from it not being a cohesive and unified
Right.
consciousness, which is why Christ consciousness is also known as unity consciousness, because it's a unified form of consciousness. So Luciferian energy is fragmented, and that's why you can tell when a being has heavy amounts of cognitive dissonance, that's just Luciferian energy. This could even be placed in a hyper spiritual tone, kind of like everything's from the heart. Now, I've made several videos about how important heart-centered consciousness is. But when Luciferian energy takes hold of this concept of the heart center and heart-centered consciousness,
Just one piece.
it does one where it needs itself and the beings that it's influencing the human consciousness within to be in denial of the mind, to be in denial of its emotional body, to be in denial of everything, because once again, Luciferian energy is one-dimensional, and it needs you to only be eyes and ears, meaning it truly feels like it's in the
apart.
peak state of existence,
But not full.
by being
Pieces.
as passive as possible, as non-action oriented as possible,
Separate.
and as peaceful as possible. But in this way, it isn't true peace because it's not coming from true fulfillment and disidentification. It's just coming from denial and fragmentation. So it even appears sometimes as truly
Wow.
heart-centered, and it can come through that facet and that stream of belief systems, but it's one that's always creating fruits, meaning you're always going to get as the end product of that some sort of judgment or some sort of denial and resentment of self. So that's how you know when a being
You
is
play
heavily
yourself through
inside
Luciferian.
Luciferian energy. It's where they're coming from that oneness, that truth of the heart center. But they're coming from that highlighting all of the parts within heart-centered consciousness and within oneness that diminish and that make you judge and turn against the emotional body, the mental
Wow,
body,
against yourself, you're
the
dividing
etheric
yourself
body,
through that.
all of the other bodies within our energy field. That's also why
not
its
wholeness.
favorite game to play is light versus the dark, or God against the devil. So all of those different belief systems, because you can have that story play out in so many different flavors within this age. It doesn't need to be strictly just one type of religious belief system anymore, but we could still pull from this religious thought form, that's Luciferian, of light versus dark, and of God versus the devil, and all the different ways that that story plays out is coming from Luciferian energy, because it's coming from that fragmentation and that dissonance within that being. So this doesn't mean that there's no such thing as light and dark, but when we're viewing it through a very fundamentalist mentality, very elementary in our stage
Indoctrination.
of consciousness,
Definitely.
and not coming
Dogma.
from a more mature and integrated form of consciousness, this is Luciferian energy trying to fragment our consciousness into a more immature state, which is why the Latin word for religion is regard, which is to withhold, to tie back. It wants you to do over. It wants you to do that evolutionary cycle again. It does not want you to move forward.
Legion.
It does not want you to move past the threshold of free will being an illusion and into the threshold of dharma, of discernment, of mature consciousness, of unified consciousness. In fact, if it wasn't for some key positive traits that this state of consciousness contains, I would be calling this personified force in nature dissonance or fanaticism. But Luciferian energy would best be described as the personified force in nature of deviance. It is a rebellious energy. There's a lot of positivity to not liking structure, especially if that order that structure has created is one that is not actually order at all. You would need a lot of rebellious, a lot of deviant energy to harness so that you can be able to break out of those belief systems to clearly perceive the fact that that structure or that order was not actually in a healthy state of consciousness at all. And that's why Luciferian energy in its most exalted form brings with it the deviance that a being needs in order to break out of whatever stagnation and whatever calcification their stream of consciousness is currently stuck within. So this deviant energy that Luciferian energy brings is enormously beneficial for when a being is channeling, because when a being is channeling, they need a large bandwidth to really go anywhere meaningful, to have that multidimensional, full range spectrum. And even though Luciferian energy is not multidimensional and full bandwidth spectrum, it would be very positive to harness that energy in those times to be able to go into higher states of consciousness and the highest states of dimensions, having within that same bandwidth also the information to stay grounded and to stay embodied and integrated. So it can be a very useful team member within our bandwidth. And because of that, that's how we evolve. We evolve by using the positive attributes of this Luciferian energy as a deviant, because all evolution comes from a state of deviance, deviating from the norm. Now there's negative concepts within deviation that I don't even need to go over because we're already familiar with the detrimental side of deviance. But we rarely look at deviance in its positive and exalted light. And the Luciferian energy is the best frequency or the best personified force in nature when it comes to this exalted form, this enlightened form of deviance. So long as a being is aware of the negative form of this same force of deviation, which in this case would be to rebel unnecessarily against what is. So it's one that denies through its rebellion. It's in its youth. It denies and rejects the larger concepts of knowledge and information that are coming into the stream to help develop that being and develop that consciousness. So when a being is using consciously the Luciferian energy in its exalted form, it's no longer in control. It's no longer this force influencing us in a possessed way. We're using it now in a conscious and grounded demeanor. Luciferian energy is known for being redeemable. This is depicted in the parable of the crucifixion, where one rebel who is crucified next to Jesus asks him to remember him. Jesus is the middle pillar, which is the personified force of the middle way. He assures the rebel that he will be with him. The title rebel was then later translated to thief. The illustration of the crucifixion being in a trinity is intentional and symbolic. It's to illustrate the three pillars of the tree of life. The esoteric significance of Lucifer is that the Luciferian energy does not run through a column that can go as high as the middle column, otherwise known as Christ consciousness column. It cannot go to Keter on the tree of life, but it can still be redeemed. It is not a direct adversary to our evolution, the way harmonic forces are. Luciferian energy can be reasoned with, and it can come into balance. One could even say it could be saved. Ultimately, Luciferian consciousness plays out like a Greek tragedy. It never truly attains its goal for getting humanity into a higher dimensional, multidimensional realm of existence, because it can only drag human consciousness by fragmenting it into the realms of the false light, where it resides, where it doesn't even know that it's not in the peak state of consciousness, but forever thinks it is in the peak state of consciousness. I hope this has saved you. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through...
Powerful. So in its detriment, it appears that it will take you to your lower form, wanting you to start over again. But if you use it to break out of the mold, which usually is the beginning to break out of a system, to break out of religion, to break out of politricks, you have to have that aspect of the rebel. But I've even noticed it's playing out when you're a rebel to truth. It doesn't serve you no more. And I didn't look at it as that. I just would look at it when you come into truth and you're in truth. What are you playing the rebel from? You're rebelling against yourself. That's how I looked at it. It had its aspect, but it's not a state to always be in. As you see, the Luciferian state only deals with hearing and hearing and eyesight, right? With seeing and hearing. It doesn't, which is only a part. It's only a part of the full, your full five senses. Hearing and talking. It's not even giving you the sight or the other five senses or aspects of yourself, and then it will rebel against itself, and then the cognitive dissonance will set in because it only tries to keep you to a certain point. But you could harness the energy to break out of situations, especially that would be really beginning. To me, when you break out of your religious doldrums or your church or whatever, your belief systems, you would want to harness it, meaning you control it. Don't let it control you, because it will run wild and pull you back into an infantile or lower thinking or immature state of being. Again, like, let's do it again. Let's do it over. And you may have grown to a certain point, and I would call it backsliding or backstepping, right? Not really following through. And then not even being able to trust the other aspects of yourself. It would never trust your discernment, because it actually that's very heavy when you're dealing with the energies. She didn't go into the historical thing it was used for Venus. She was using how the Luciferian energy works. And of course, we know we got a bunch of people who run stuff, or the wood, or groups of people who are, the wood and all those jokety jokers talking about the Luciferians, or the Democratic Party being Luciferians, or whomever operates in that aspect of the Luciferian energy. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not full maturity. It's actually kind of like a teenager. It will help you rebel. Teenagers are good at rebelling, but they're not good at maturity. One more time. Teenagers are good at rebellion, but they're not good at maturity. Once again, teenagers are very good at rebellion, but not good at maturity. And that's what it was. So it would keep you in a juvenile state if you harnessed it or let it harness you. So that's heavy. We really have to have discernment's key. But you guys have a great day. That's why I said I'd start this, get it going, because it was a long 28:46 video. So it was long. So we're going to cut out now. That's why I came real quick into it, and we're going to go real quick out of it. But you guys have a great day. And share, comment, and like, and please share, and invite more people who would be interested. Have a great day.